So today's office hours is about best practices for setting up new communities. A lot of people obviously get implemented into TOPS 1 and you're using it, you're moving along, and then your business grows. You get another community, and that is great. That's great news. But then how do you get that community into your TOPS 1? And that's what this video, or I'm sorry, this webinar is going to accomplish. We're going to talk about the best practices for setting up those new communities. The agenda today, we're going to go over adding a new community. We're going to go over setting up using the wizard, which covers owners and properties, accounting and the general ledger, banks, AR codes and management codes, which includes CCR and work order, and then further setup over vendors. And then we're going to talk a little bit about your beginning balances for owners and the general ledger at the end. Now, you don't have to do all of these things at once, and we will go through the things you do have to do and won't have to do to get you set up to get your community going. All right, let's talk about the things you will need to be prepared. Number one, it's best to have all of your community documents on hand for the codes and the setup community information. And so those docs for your communities are your rules and regulations and your standard practices and information on the community that you're going to need. That's going to give you a lot of your information that you're going to use during the setup of your community. Now that could be items that you set up at a later time in more detail, but some of this you may need in the general setup. And number two, you're going to need a complete GL trial balance showing all accounts and balances at the date you wish to start this community. That's going to start your general ledger side. Again, this is something you could do later, the accounts and balances. You don't have to do it in the initial community setup, but if you're setting up start to finish, you will need that trial balance to get you started. And number three, of course, owners' names and addresses information, vendors' names and addresses, and your bank information. We are going to show you the complete setup. I will tell you that you do have the option to only set up the community and then later on come back and set up just the owners or just the GL side. But to use the community, you will need the entire general ledger section set up to get started using the community. As far as the owners, obviously you would have to add an owner to use the owner section, but we'll go through those things as well. All right, let's get to the how-to. Adding a new community. So we're going to be going over how to set up or upload spreadsheet data for your community. Now, it can be done in different ways. If you're already using TOPS software, IQ or Pro, and you're receiving a community from another management company and they are IQ or Pro, we could do the import for you. That is something we can do, or you could learn to import yourself. I don't necessarily suggest doing the import yourself. We can have the conversions department do it for you, but it is possible. The other option is what we're really going to focus on today is doing it yourself, doing these files, bringing these files in without imports. That's the general idea of this webinar, is doing it yourself with paperwork that you have and information that you have. So in general, you will not need any import files to complete what we're going to go over today. There will be options to do that with an import file, but it is not required. And like I said, what we're going over today does not require the import. So what you're going to do to start is on your TOPS 1 homepage, starting from the main menu, you're going to go to the left, Portfolio and Communities. Now, those of you that have dual screens and can do this along with the webinar, I fully advise doing that. If you have one screen with the webinar and the other screen where actually you're going through it, that is something that I would advise. All right, so Portfolio Communities. And then from the actions at the top right-hand corner, you're going to click Add Community. And what this is going to give you is the Adding a New Community screen. So you're going to enter your community information, including contacts and addresses and things like that. So number one on the screen that's highlighted, number one, that's your community alias and the community name. Now, If you want to, some people don't put an alias for the community. They simply put the community name in the display name. So the alias is required. It's usually the initials of the community. Those of you that are pro in IQ, traditionally it's a 2 or 3 digit alphanumeric code that would indicate the community name. And so that's going to be the alias, 2 or 3 digits. I think 3 is standard. And then you're going to put the community name. So you have the alias ID, which is the initials, the community name, and then below that you see the display name. Now we're still on number 1. The display name is where you can alter it, removing the alias so that the display name will only show the company name, the community name. So you will see when you add the alias in the name, the display name populates. At that point, you can remove whatever you want or add whatever you want to that display name. The display name also is an option for merge codes, which you may want to use the display name as opposed to the community name in merge codes. Number 2, the community info. Now, I do want to point out, adding a community, nothing is required past number 1. Number 1 is the required field, the alias, the community name, and then the display name populates. Notice the red asterisk next to those fields. Number 2, down here at the bottom, the federal tax ID number, the time zone, the max number of homes, those things do not have an asterisk next to them. They're not required. But in all good practice, you really want to fill these in as soon as possible. And in the setup process is no better time. So if you have the federal tax ID number for the community, you can fill in the time zone the community is in. Max number of homes is if you're a completely developed community. Now, if you're not a completely developed community, but you do know your max number of homes, you can fill that in. If you don't yet know it, you can leave it blank, of course. Fee coverage description, and it gives you a little description, describe what is covered in your association fees. This is something that was previously in Pro and IQ in the fact sheet, but this is where it lives now in TOPS 1, the fee coverage description. Again, not a required field, but a lot of companies like to go ahead and put that in. Then we have our delinquency period, 1, 2, and 3, and this is going to tie into your accounts receivable aging report. Most companies do 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. It's not something you have to do. Some do much larger days and periods. It's up to you. Now, a little bit further down, if you are in California and you do require that EDD employer account number, that is where it will be living in the TOPS 1. Now, of course, again, if you're not in California and that's not required, do not fill it in. All right, down to the bottom, we're at number 3, your community contacts. Again, not required, but I highly suggest doing this. And these community contacts are going to stem from your users in the system. So if the person is not a user in TOPS 1, you will not have the option of their name. So property manager for the community and accountant for the community, if you were to click those drop downs, they would show a complete community list, a complete user list for your TOPS 1. So if the user is in there, you could identify them as the property manager or the accountant. Again, number 1 is required, but I really suggest going ahead and filling in those blanks now, although you can come back later and fill them in once the community is saved. Nothing stopping you there. All right, continuing on with adding the community on the community screen, you're going to enter the community information and add your contacts. Number 4 highlighted is the community phone numbers. I also want to point out the add button at the top right-hand corner of the phone numbers, and then across from email and websites and addresses. That add button, if you were to click it, would give you the options of different types of phone numbers. So you may not have a primary, or you may not have a fax number, and so you may want to garbage can that. But you may have a mobile number, and you want to add that, or a home number if that's something that you want to use for a community. But that add button is going to give you different options. So if it's not a main number, now after you add that phone number, you're going to then select which one is primary. And I've got arrows on the left indicating the primary bullet. Now only one number can be primary per community for a phone number. Only one number can be, or I'm sorry, one email address can be primary for a community, and one address will be the primary mailing address. But again, the email and websites, if you click the add button, you also will have the option to add additional emails or websites, their Facebook, their Instagram, things like that, where you would want to track these communities on social media. And you may ask, why would I want to fill all those things into TOPS 1? The reason is for it to be convenient. Say you're, working reception in a community, and a homeowner calls and asks if the community has a Facebook page or any kind of social media. It's going to be a one-stop shop for that reception person or anybody in your company to look at the community homepage and say, yes, absolutely we do, and here's the address, or copy and paste it into an email for that homeowner or user. So it's kind of where you're putting all your information so that it's at hand. And then, of course, that's number 5. Number 6, we have our addresses. The addresses are something I want you to pay special attention to, because the very first option says return payment address, but under those add buttons, there was going to be the office address, the lockbox address. Those addresses are very important because they do also tie to merge codes. And merge codes and templates, as you know, is how the data gets into the letters that goes out to the owners. So we do want to make sure that we have the proper address used. Now, later on, if you're printing your letters and the address is not coming out and you know it's in the system, come back and make sure that merge code matches the name of the address. I know that's a little getting off subject, but there we are. And again, don't forget to select the primary on all of these options: primary mailing address, primary email, primary phone number. Very, very important. All right. When you're adding a new community, once you've added all that information, you're going to go to the top right-hand corner of the screen and go to Actions. And at that point, you have the option to save, or you can save and continue on to another one, save and add new, or continue on to adding properties, owners, or accounting. Now, those are not required. Literally, all you have to do is click Save, and it will save the community you've just added. All right, so let's talk about using the wizard to add owners and properties. So after we click that save button, if you did say that you wanted to continue on to owners and properties, this is the screen that would populate. Now, I do want to kind of backtrack and say if it didn't, when you go to that community, there will be that orange bar. A lot of you are familiar with the orange bar at the top of the screen that will show that you do not have a complete setup for owners and properties or your general ledger. And it does do it separately, because you can set up one or the other and then go back to it later. But we're going to go straight through and say we're going to click on owners and properties on that orange bar or in the save, which will take it to this screen. Again, you do not have to add your properties first. You could do your general ledger first, but for purposes of showing you this, we're just going to start with what it would look like if you went to owners and properties. So at the top of the screen in that community setup, properties and owners, you have 2 options. You have add or import. And like I said, we're not going to do import in this section. We're going to talk about doing it by hand. So you would click add. But if you were importing, you would need that CSV file for import. Okay. If you want to look into the import options, you can get some detailed instructions in our knowledge base. If you search for import, you'll find some information in our knowledge base articles. But we're just going to talk about clicking add. When you click add, it's going to open up the add a new property screen. Property obviously is also connected to the owner, so it will ask for that as well. At the top, it's going to ask you for the property address, and this is required. Property address is the on-site address at your community. It's the property in your community. So you will add in the number and then the street address and the account number. Now, when adding properties, please be aware it's a little bit different in the screen than it was in Pro and IQ. Your first box is simply for the number, just the number. The second box is for the street. Now, if you have a P.O. box, you would not use that first box at all. The second box is where you would put your P.O. box, and it kind of shows in a shaded gray explanation there so you can see it. And then, of course, you have the option to put in the account number, lot number, square footage. Those are not required. You'll notice the ones that are required are the ones with the asterisk next to it. And on screen in our example, there are the things that are boxed in red. So of course the property address is required. And then down below, the owner's name is required. So I also like to say it's a good idea to go ahead and fill out this information if you have it, if you have the square footage, if you have a ratio, if you have an assessed value, go ahead and fill that in. It's not going to hurt, and that data is just going to be there for later if you need it. Now you'll notice there are flags that you can automatically turn on, especially if you're getting this from another management company and you know that they are in direct debit, you can go ahead and turn that on. If it's a rental, or if it is someone who needs a hold payment or hold delinquency notice, if they're already in collections, you can go ahead and turn those on so that that owner is already identified in that way. Now the display name, as a tip at the bottom here, you'll notice the display name has an option for first name, middle name, and last name. And some of you may say, well, I have a husband and wife, or I have a trust, and it has multiple names, and I don't have just one name, I have multiple names. You can put as many names as you want. I know this field doesn't look very large, but it can hold quite a bit of information. And as you add it in the first name, middle name, last name, the display name will then open up with that information. Now you could put all the names in the first and middle name, and then whatever sort name you want to use in the last name. Now remember, the last name needs to be simply a sort name. It cannot be someone's first and last name, because then it will sort by the first letter of the first name that's in that last name box. Not to be confusing, and I know that I am, but that last name box needs to simply be a single name, and that would be a sort name for you. The first name and middle name can be as many, John Doe and Jane Smith. Absolutely, you can put that in there, but then the last name would be Smith, and then just make sure that your display name shows as you want it to show on a mailing label. Okay? If any of you have questions about that or are confused about that, just let us know. A lot of things in here may require further questioning. If you don't have time today to look into it, you can ask at any point. Contacting support or your customer success rep, we can help you out with that. All right, and then once you've added all the properties that you want to, you can go ahead and click next and then go to finish. So again, maybe you don't want to add all your homeowners today. Matter of fact, I'm going to go back a screen. Maybe you don't want to add all of your homeowners today. You're just going to add the very first one and click Save. And then you're going to click Done with the intention of adding them later. You can absolutely just add one now and add the rest later. So when you get to the next screen and you click Done, Complete Setup, notice in our example, there's only one. That's possible too. If you want to sit there and add all of your owners at once, you can do that. But if you want to just add the one and then go back and add it later in the owner property screen where you can add a property, that is possible too. Now, whenever you click Complete, you're just going to verify that you see the number of properties that you expect to see, and then you can complete setup, or you can click on accounting setup. All right, then we're going to go on to the other part of the setup process. It's setup using for the accounting and general ledger. So to continue in the community, click the accounting setup, and that will take you to the setup for the accounting portion. Again, these things do not have to be done at one point. You can have one person doing the property setup and complete that, and another person who does the accounting complete the accounting setup. Absolutely, it can be done at different times by different people on different workstations in different countries if you need to. But whenever you do your accounting setup, the first thing you're going to need to do, circled in red at the bottom in our example, is enter your fiscal start date. I do want to point out that if you're receiving a community from another community management company, that fiscal start date is the actual fiscal year start. If you're a January to December fiscal, that would be January. It's not the community add date. So if you're adding the community in September, but it's a January to December fiscal, that fiscal start date is still going to be January. But for those of you that are in odd fiscals, say you're a, September to August fiscal, then you would put September as that fiscal start date. So remember, that is the first month of the year that you are currently in. Then you're going to select your accounting period frequency. This is a question a lot of people have. The choices are monthly or quarterly. I'm going to say 97% of anybody I've ever come in contact with was monthly. There is a choice to do quarterly, and people get confused and say, well, I would like to do quarterly, but really the question is, how often do you need to run reports and reconcile? Do you run your reports monthly and report to the board monthly, or do you only do it once a quarter? Most people do it monthly. So I'm going to say, when in doubt, choose monthly, but also refer back to your accountant. And then you're going to pick an accounting method. You have 3 accounting methods available to you in TOPS 1. The first is cash accounting, and that's where income is counted when cash or check is actually received, and expenses are counted when it's actually paid. Cash accounting, some people use it. Some states do not allow it. By law, you cannot be cash accounting in some states. So make sure that you check with your state and county laws to make sure that your business can be cash accounting. And maybe even the opposite is true if it can be accrual accounting. I just know that there are some states that do not legally allow cash accounting. They do require the accrual in order. Accrual is the next option. Transactions are counted when they happen, regardless of when the money is actually received or paid. You will have those clearing accounts, as we refer to them here at TOPS. I like accrual accounting. Personally, it is my favorite method of accounting because you can see where everything is, nothing is. Maybe you absolutely know where all your money is. I really like it. The third option is modified accrual. So modified accrual is if an AP bill has not received for an expense occurred during the accounting period, this expense is not recorded accrued until the bill is actually received. Basically what that means, modified accrual to TOPS, and in a more simplified term, is that your accounts receivable will run as accrual accounting, and your accounts payable will run as cash. That is modified accrual according to TOPS 1. There may be other methods of modified accrual, but in TOPS 1, it basically means that cash accounting for your AP and accrual for your AR. All right. Now we're going to go into the next screen, which is your ranges. Ranges are your chart of account setup. You have assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expense. Very simple, very basic account types. Next to that are their account names. Now, normally when you come in here, a lot of you will already have a chart of accounts set up and ready to go, and they also already have a set of ranges that go along with it. Most of the time, we suggest you go ahead and click on Create Ranges. Now, obviously, if you have an import file, use it, but most of us are not going to have that import file. So we're going to click the one button at the top right that says Create Ranges. It's highlighted in red for this training. And that's going to open up what's in the example at the bottom. It's going to show the general ledger account ranges, assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expense. Very basic accounts. At this point, you could absolutely edit those accounts. You could extend it. You may not want your assets to go to 299. You may want to go to 1999. And then again, your expenses. Obviously, a lot of you are going to want to extend your expenses out, but for adding the community, you simply want to keep it basic, very, very basic. So when you create ranges, aside from moving the numbers around, you do not want to extend in the create a community process, very, very basic. Now, at this point, at the top left, use cost centers. If you know that you're going to be using cost centers, you would check that box, but that really is something that you're only going to do while importing. If you do not have an import file, but do intend on using cost centers later on, I would suggest turning on cost centers after the community is created. If you don't know what a cost center is, then you're probably not using it, but you can get some information about that from your support rep or your customer success rep, or while you're in implementation, we'll talk to you about cost centers. But basically, I would say if you're not using an import file, I would not choose cost centers in creating the community. We would do that later. So again, keep it basic, keep it simple, just the basic account ranges. Now, I do want to show you this just so everybody can understand, and I want you to understand this screen we're on is not part of the import and wizard process of adding a community. This is just for those of you that say, well, I know I just have one expense range, but my expenses are broken out many, many, many ways. So remember, this is not part of the setup, but later, after the community is saved, you can extend those ranges for more detailed reporting. So notice on the right-hand side, we have a small snippet example of an income and expense sheet where you have the general ledger, general and administrative totals, unit expenses, pool, site improvement, maintenance. They're all broken out into parts and pieces as needed. This is something you can do after you've saved your community. So if you're in there and you're creating those ranges and you say, well, that doesn't encompass all the ranges I need, or later on after you've done that, maybe you realize your reports are not as beautiful as you would like them to be, this is probably the reason why, because then later, after you save the community, you can go in and extend those ranges. Again, ask your support or your customer success rep for more information on extending your ranges. All right, continuing on our setup process, using the wizard for accounting and general ledger, we're back to where we were before. We're going to talk about your chart of accounts. Now, this is where you would import your chart of accounts if you had them. Again, most of people are not going to have an import file. So if you don't have an import file, even if you have a chart of accounts, you're not going to import it. You're not going to type it into the system. You're simply going to use default values. So again, if you have an import of your chart of accounts, you absolutely can use it in this screen. If you do not, you're going to use default values. When you click the use default values, the system will give you a default range of numbers. They're going to be a very simple, very short range of numbers, but they will be all of the required accounts to start your community. Afterwards, after you save the community, you can go back and edit the chart of accounts and extend it. Or later on, if you have an import file after you've created the community and you then want to import that in, you can as well at some other point. But during the process of creating the community in the general ledger section, you basically just want to get off the ground, and that means using the default values. Now, after you enter the default values, you will have to select required accounts. If you use default values, the required accounts will probably populate. If they don't, all you're going to do is click those folders on the right-hand side of retained earnings, accounts payable, default cash, year-end suspense, and those things are going to fill in the blank for the system. The system will know what account you're using for retained earnings, what account you're using for accounts payable clearing. Now, if you're cash accounting and you're not using an accounts payable clearing, It doesn't matter. It's still a required account, even if it's an account that you're not going to use. Your default cash would be your main bank account, and your year-end suspense account you will need to enter as well. All right, the next screen is going to ask you about banks. So when you're in the next screen setting up that community, it's going to ask you about what bank you want for your default bank. You can choose your bank. Now, if you're an existing TOPS 1 user, the bank that you use for this new community may already exist. And if you click the drop down on the right-hand side, it's going to ask you to choose your bank from your list of banks. If you don't see the bank that you need, and I'm talking about just a bank name, we're not adding an account to the bank, just the name of the bank. So, for example, if you banked with BB&T obviously is not on this list. You would need to add a bank. So instead of clicking the drop down, you would click that plus symbol on choose your bank. And then the next screen that pops up is going to be add a bank. All fields here besides the routing number are required. So the bank alias, which is the initials of the account, is required. The bank name is required. The display name is required. The alias, again, is going to be probably the initials of the bank. Most people use it that way. BB&T would be BBT, where the bank name would be Branch Banking and Trust, I think is their actual name. And then the display name. So you would put your initials, your bank name, your display name. The routing number is not required. This is going to be the standard routing number. You don't have to fill it in, but it would make life a lot easier for you later on if the routing number was in here, the default routing number for that bank, so that all accounts under it could be automatically listed with that routing number without having to go find it. But it's not required. And then you would click Save or Save and Add New and add all of the banks that you need to. Of course, if the bank name already exists, you would select it. And at that point, it would ask you about a bank account. So you have your bank, BB&T, but then you may have checking, savings, reserve, CDs in that account. Those are accounts in the bank. So not the bank name, but the bank account. All right, so this is where you're going to set up your bank account. First of all, you're going to choose your bank from the drop down. If you had to add it in the skirt earlier with the plus symbol, you would add it, and now that bank name would show up in your choose your bank. At the bottom there, you're going to choose your bank details. I got to be honest, the bank details screen for adding an account, bank account details, is not the order I would have chosen for this screen. So to add a bank account, the first thing you want to do is choose the general ledger account number. I know it's not first in the drop down there, but that's the first thing you're going to want to do, is identify the chart of accounts number, because it's probably going to have the name of the bank or some general bank information that could be helpful to you. So when adding a bank account, make sure to choose the GL account first. Then, if the bank name is not populated at that point, you would fill in the bank name. You do want to make sure that when you fill in that bank name, that it's a descriptive name, so you'll know which account this is, because the bank name is going to show other places. A lot of people like to put the last 4 digits of the bank account number attached to the chart of accounts number and the bank name, so that you can easily identify that bank. That is an option. Some people like to do that. The bank account type would be checking, savings, or other. The account number obviously is required. The lockbox ID is not required, but if you have a lockbox ID, you do want to go ahead and fill that in. A lockbox ID is required for receiving lockboxes in the TOPS 1 system. So if you don't put it in now and then later on you go to try to add a lockbox, it will error out saying you can't identify the community. You will have to come back and add that lockbox ID to the bank. A starting check number is required. Now, if you don't have a starting check number, or you get to choose the check number that you start with, you can choose whatever number you wish. A lot of people, when starting a new system, will go to the next series. So if you were working in the 2000s in one management company and the new management company, they may start with the 3000 series to keep it separate. That's up to you as well. And then, of course, the routing number. There it is the box that says use default routing number. So if you've already identified the routing number in that bank, you can click that box and the default routing number will populate in the event that it's already been set up. And that's where it's going to kind of save you a little bit of time and effort to go ahead and have that saved routing number in the system. All right. So after you save your bank, the next screen is going to ask you to set up your codes. Now, obviously, a lot of us don't have codes going into a new community, or you don't have an import file for codes. In that case, you're simply going to use default values again. If you're not importing, you just use default values. It will automatically add all the required charge codes. Now, if you don't want to do that, you could simply come down to the required codes, such as prepaid, and click the folder and choose from your chart of accounts that will populate which account number you want for your prepaid. But if you use default values, they should all populate and remove themselves from the system. At that point, you can just click next, and those required accounts will pop in. Now, later on, after you save your community, again, you can go into those codes and edit them and make them your own. Add your A1 assessment amount, assign it to your homeowners, add your CCR codes, add your work order codes, add your miscellaneous codes. All that can be done. You can identify which GL account they belong to. But in the setting up of the community in the wizard, you simply want to use default values if you do not have an import file. All right. And you can complete setup. There was a screen that I did not show you that showed beginning balances and histories for owners. That screen is for importing files only. If you have an import file, you could upload beginning balances and histories, but because properties were added manually, and that's the way that we've taught in this webinar, adding properties manually, you'll not be able to upload those beginning balance and histories. So you will just pass by that screen and complete setup. Now, when we get done here, if I have enough time, I'm going to go through the setup process so you can see it quite quickly. But basically, if you are following along and you see that, you do want to just click next past it, because we don't have beginning balances and histories. We're just going to go straight to complete setup. When you complete setup, then you're going to get an accounting setup review. This is a good screen to print. There is a print button at the bottom of this. It will show your accounting information. It'll show your GL accounts, your bank accounts, your charge codes. It's a good screen to print and keep for your files, or print to file if you're going green, not printing and using paper. And then you're going to view your community. It's going to tell you, congratulations, your community setup for properties and owners is complete, or general ledger is complete, and then basically everything is done. Now, once you add your community, you may need to add vendors. So I just wanted to go over adding a vendor very quickly, so that if you are adding a community and you do want to go back and add that vendor, you can. You would go to accounts payable from within that community, or any community really, because vendors are global. You would go to accounts payable vendors, and then you would go to actions at the top right and add a vendor. The vendor ID, we usually recommend, like in all things, the alias and ID is the abbreviation of the vendor's name, or you can come up with a numbering system. And then the vendor's name is the way that you want it to print on checks and reports. So make sure that the vendor name is as it should be on checks that are cut to the vendor or reports that you want to see. So here is the alias and the vendor name. Again, the alias is just the initials of the vendor or a numbering system that you have in your office, and then the vendor name is going to be the name that needs to print on checks. Those are required, adding a vendor. The only thing required, adding a vendor, but you also have the option to enter the federal tax ID number if they receive 1099s. If they're inactive at some point, you can make them inactive. And again, if you're in California and they're eligible for the EDD reporting, you would turn that on. A lot of people say, well, I don't need to fill in the tax ID number if they receive 1099s when I'm adding a vendor. I just want to get them added. I don't need to worry about that till the end of the year. But this will save you time at the end of the year. If you have that information on hand, go ahead and fill in that federal tax ID number. Turn it on that they receive 1099s. They may make the minimum, and this will make your life a lot easier at the end of the year if that information is already in the system. Then again, optional, adding phone numbers for the vendor. And don't forget, if you click that add button, you'll see other options for phone numbers, email, and website. Again, the vendor's Facebook, the vendor's Twitter account, I think is one of the options. I don't really remember, but those things are in the system, and you can go ahead and add those. By default, the phone numbers will show as listed. Notice to the right of everything, it shows listed. And this is something that you can take back to adding any part of the community or the owners. They too will show as listed. But if you click that button for listed, then they will show as unlisted. And so depending on if the numbers or the email addresses or what have you is something that doesn't need to be given out to other people, you can list it as unlisted, and then you'll be able to see if someone calls in and says, hey, I need to know this email of this vendor or what have you, you can say, well, I'm sorry, it's unlisted. The same thing for adding properties, kind of backtracking a little bit. Adding properties, your owner will have a phone number or email address. That too you can list as listed or unlisted. And also, for the community, you can list certain numbers as unlisted, numbers that are only supposed to be in the office. You're not supposed to give out to other people. Personal numbers and things like that can be unlisted as opposed to listed. All right. Then you have your addresses. Of course, the ad gives you your other options for those addresses, your billing address, your shipping address. If this vendor does not have a shipping address, you can garbage can it and remove it. Don't forget to choose primary mailing address on the address that is primary. This is for vendors. Again, backtracking for primary mailing for owners, primary for the community. Those things too need to be selected and then saved. Another part to adding a community that needs to be considered is the beginning balances for the owners. Now, when a homeowner is transitioned to TOPS 1, obviously they will have outstanding balances. Some of them will, some of them won't. And they need to be entered into TOPS 1 so that they started at the same balance that they were in the previous application and management company. So you will need to add those in as a beginning balance. Now, if a homeowner has a credit balance, the credit will be entered in the owner adjustment function, which is on the left-hand side, not in beginning balance, but owner adjustment for prepaids only. And when you enter that prepaid, the credit and debit side of the prepaid will be the same. Now, this, again, is something that's a little bit more in detail that I don't have to show you right now, but afterwards, if we have time, I will. Again, to get those entries in the system, the beginning balance does not hit the general ledger, and you don't want it to, because you're also going to do a journal entry to get the beginning balances of the GL accounts into the system. And part of those GL entries will be the accounts receivable, and you don't want to double post the GL by doing that journal entry and then adding owner balances here that will also hit the GL. You don't want it to, so we do beginning balances. Beginning balances in TOPS do not hit the general ledger. Again, if you're doing the prepaid and you go into the owner adjustment function, the debit and credit account will be the same, which will wash the general ledger. I know this is getting a little deep into this, but it's just something I wanted to go over so that you would see that this is something that you do need to take into consideration when adding a new community. And then finally, entering in that beginning balance journal entry. A lot of people get new communities and they say, well, how do I get all my balances in? You're going to enter all of your balances at once, all of your general ledger balances. And to do that, you're going to need a complete GL trial balance report from your previous management company or from your previous software, a complete general ledger trial balance. And that's going to show all of your GL accounts and their ending balance from the date that you're ending the community in one software and adding it to another. You're simply going to add this in one giant big journal entry. Some people think they need, the balance sheet, the income statement. Yes, you can do that, but the best practice, the best thing you can do is use the trial balance. It's going to give you every single GL account in one place. It's going to be balanced. You can enter it all in. So we're going to do it as one big journal entry. So you're going to go into General Ledger on the left-hand side and go to Journal Entries. And from there, you're going to say Actions, New Journal Entry. At that point, you're going to fill in the details, the date of the journal entry. So that's going to be your beginning balance date. The reference, which is going to identify the name on the activity feed, and the description is describing this entry. So the reference for this would be something like BEGBAL. It's a beginning balance entry. That's the type of entry it is. The description, now it looks like a small space to type in, but I guarantee you I've added 4 of the alphabet in there and it lets you keep on typing. So put as much detail as you can. This journal entry is the beginning balance of the accounts that I got from so-and-so's management company, from this report and this software they were using. As much detail as you can. I always say when doing journal entries, the reference and description needs to be so detailed that if you were being audited a year from now, the auditor wouldn't even have to ask you what the journal entry was for. They can simply see it on the screen. So make it simple for yourself at the time, describe it, you've got the space, there's no limit in the space, type away all that detail in there. And that goes for everyday journal entries as well. All right, then after you do that, you're going to enter in the line items of the journal entry, starting with the very first account. You're going to choose your account from that chart of accounts. In that folder button, there is an add. So if you don't see the item in the chart of accounts, here's your opportunity to go ahead and add that GL account number. Then the reference and the description will auto-populate from the top of the journal entry. So you won't have to type in the reference and description again, but you will have the opportunity to edit it line by line. So you could add notes to the reference and description by GL account line by line. And then you're going to put in if it was a credit account, you're going to put in if it was a credit amount or a debit amount. One option per GL account, you would put in debit amount or credit amount, and then you would click the plus symbol on the right-hand side, adding it to the GL. Okay, then you would do that on repeat. The next one would be the next GL account number, and then if it was a debit or credit, so on and so forth. And at the bottom, you see in red and green, it says debits 0, credits 0, balance 0. As you add in these debits and credits, they will total in that number. And when you're finished, the balance should be 0. So at the bottom, I know that seems crazy, the credits and debits should be the exact same number and the balance should be 0 when you're done. At that point, you can post at the top of the page. And that's the end of my webinar here for Customer Success Office Hours. Now, like I said before, we have a few minutes. I'm going to hurry and show you guys adding a community as fast as I can. We are limited on time. If we run over, if you guys still want to stay around, I'll get through it as fast as I can. So I'm just going to bring it up on screen. Again, as you have questions, go ahead and ask them. We weren't able to get the webinar on screen. If you want a copy of the webinar, just email us and we will send you that copy, or put it in the chat and she will make a note to email it to you later. So this is my training community. For those of you wondering if we're going to do a webinar on doing the import with actual import files, I don't know the answer to that. I do know that your best bet is to start with making an inquiry to your customer success rep to support or conversions about that. If you have a community that you'd like to build by hand using the import files, maybe reach out and see if we have any information that you can have. Like I said, most of the time, the import files are used by conversions only. It's very rare that we have a client actually using those, simply because it requires very specific files that normally come from a pro or IQ client. So if you're wondering about the import files, that is possible, but I would say reach out to your support rep or your customer success rep or your implementation person or conversions. Pretty much anybody in the company can talk to you about that. So here we are in my training community. Really quick, like I said, because we're almost out of time, portfolio communities. I'm going to go to actions and add a community. I'm calling it OH. Office Hours is the name of my community. My alias is OH. My name is Office Hours. Again, this is all that's required in this screen. You can absolutely fill in other things, but all that's required is the alias of the name, and then actions and save. All right, it's going to save my community. Obviously, I didn't fill in the address. I could do that now at this point if I wanted to. From the community screen, you know you're in the community screen because it says community. At the top right, you can edit that community. It takes you right back to that screen with addresses and information. So you can always fill that out at a later time. Again, like I described before, whenever you add that community, it gives you that orange bar at the top letting you know the community is not completed for setup. A couple of things to know. A bank is required for you to do anything in this community. So even if you've added all of your owners and all of your accounting, if you do not have a primary bank, nothing is going to work for you. So that's just something to remember. If nothing's working and you feel like you did everything, make sure there's a bank. We're going to start with owners and properties because that's the easiest to do. I'm simply just going to click Add, property number 111, street address, Office Street. And we're in Clearwater, Florida. All right. Again, nothing else is required. If you do, well, I'm sorry, the owner's name is required, but as far as the address goes, the account number, lot number, all that is not required, though you could fill it in now if you want to. The name is going to be Eve. And the display name is going to show. So this is my home. If I have a phone number, I would fill it in, the email address. If you have it, I would say go ahead and do that. I'm going to click Save. It's going to add that owner. I could have saved and add new, or I could click Add again. I'm just going to save that one property to get past this, click Next, and then I'm going to complete setup. And I'm completing setup for properties and owners. I'm just going to click Complete Setup, and then I'm going to say View Community. It's going to take me back to my office hours community. Now the orange bar is still there, but notice the owners and properties is gone. Accounting is there. Now, later on, I say maybe I want to add my owners and properties now. You can do that by going to Portfolio, Properties. And from the property screen at the top right, you can go to Actions and add a property. Very, very simple, easy to do, one-stop shop. So if you have not done it on the day that you're adding the community, no worries. You can simply go back and do it later. Let me go back to my office hours community. I know we're racing the clock, so I'm going as fast as I can. All right, community setup, let's get to the accounting. First thing I'm going to do is say, well, my fiscal is January to December, so that is my fiscal start date. If it's not, I'm going to click my folder here and my calendar and choose the beginning of my month. Again, most people are monthly. I want to run my balance sheet monthly. I need to report to my board monthly. I need to run these things monthly. Most people are not quarterly. It's very rare. If you are not sure, please refer to your accountant. They are going to be the one that tells you if you need to actually be monthly or quarterly, or your docs. They will tell you as well. Your accounting method, cash, accrual, or modified. I told you I'm a lover of accrual, so I'm going to choose accrual. I'm not going to use cost centers, but even if I was going to enter them later on, so I'm not going to do that now. Don't have an import file, so I'm going to click Create Ranges. And there it is. It's going to create my very easy ranges, assets, liabilities, equity. At this point, you could add another 0 if you'd like it to be 5-digit, and then just extend those down. Just add a 9, and a 9, and a 9, and a 9, and a 9. You absolutely can add it to a 5-digit or a 4-digit. I really don't suggest 3-digit chart of accounts. I'm very anti 3-digit. Some people say, well, we don't need that many numbers. Please humor me and do at least a 4-digit. It may matter later on in life. So we'll go ahead and hit save. It's going to show me my ranges here. Again, if I changed my mind, we can edit them. If I say, well, you know what, I really don't want to be 4-digit. I'm sorry, I really don't want to be 5-digit. I want to be 4-digit. I can go back and change it, save it, and there we are. We're back to 4-digit. I'm going to click Next. Here it's going to ask me about required accounts. Again, I don't have a chart of account to import, so I'm going to use default values. Here is the very simple chart of accounts you will be receiving. We keep it little because you may want to add a lot to it, or you may want to delete these out and make your own numbers. So we keep it very simple just to get you started. So we're going to say create accounts. At that point, notice my retained earnings populated, my suspense account, my accounts payable, and my cash accounting. If you do want to change these, you could at this point. If you said, well, you know what, my retained earnings, I really don't want it to be a 5100, I could add an account at this point and change it. And then I'm going to click Next. Choosing your bank. Well, I'm going to click my drop down. I have Alliance Association Bank, Enterprise Bank, and a fake bank. I don't see my bank. I want to add one. So I'm going to add BB&T as my alias. Forgive me, BB&T bank users, if I've just named the bank wrong. It might be Better Bank Branch and Trust. I think it's Banking Branch and Trust. I'm not really sure. The display name you could simply copy and paste in. And I do know my routing number, so I'm going to put it in so that it's there as default. And I'm going to click Save. Now when I click the drop down, my BB&T bank is there on screen. At this point, I do want to identify my cash account first, and then I can come back up and add the account name. BB&T fake. My lockbox ID, I don't have a lockbox, so I'm not going to fill it in. But if I do choose to use a lockbox later on, I do know that I have to fill that in. Starting check number, I'm just going to say that I'm going to start with check number 1000. Account type, this is a checking account. Account number, I put in my account number, and I'm going to use my default routing number so it auto-populates that routing number, making my life easier. Add this account. Once I add this account, it's going to show it on screen. I have the opportunity to add additional accounts, such as savings accounts, CDs, reserve accounts, but I just need the one. I don't have any other accounts. I just have a checking, so I'm going to go Next. Here we are with the codes. Now, again, we don't have an import file, so we're just going to use default values. It's going to fill in all these required fields. You must have an assessment, a late fee, collection, prepaid interest, and NSF. I'm going to use those default values. It's going to identify all of these codes for me. Later on, if I decide that I don't want to use some of these, I can absolutely delete them. but to get you started, they are required. Now, because we're doing this by hand, not by import, we do not have an import categories, and we don't have a charge code linkage import. Again, these are things normally used by people coming from Pro and IQ, and I'm going to click Next. Again, we don't have those owner balances, and we don't have the history file because we don't have the import, so we're just going to skip it and say Next. And then here's my review. Again, this is a good screen to print. There is a print button. It's going to give you all this information. You may want it for later. And I'm going to complete setup. View community. And we are live at 2 p.m. Again, adding a vendor, you would go into accounts payable, vendors, and go to actions and add a vendor. Absolutely. To do journal entries, you would go to General Ledger, Journal Entries, Actions, New Journal Entry, add your journal entry. To do beginning balances, you would go to Accounts Receivable, Adjustments. Had to think about that for a second. And then here's your beginning balance button for all balance charges. Again, if you're doing prepaid beginning balances, you would do those for the owner adjustment section.